What percentage of things that you find in medical textbooks, basic and advanced, do you think are false based on your understanding of what we actually know now compared to when the textbooks were written? And he said 50%. And then Rick said, and yep. And then Rick said, I know, I was wide-eyed too. And then Rick said, and what is the extent of impact on treatment of patients modern day? And his answer was one word: incalculable.
Oh my God. 50%
50% in currently used medical textbooks, meaning that the literature has been updated with new understanding, new scientific papers, but it has not yet been incorporated into the medical education.
Well, some guy said it, so I guess it must be true, right? All right, let's put all of this into some actual context of reality, okay? So first of all, what does it mean for a textbook to be wrong? Right, we have to sort of operationalize that before we could put a number to it. That's way too black and white, all or nothing kind of thinking. This has actually been studied, this being how up-to-date, how accurate are medical textbooks. And usually the studies will look at specific individual textbooks, right? You can't make blanket statements about all medical textbooks. And you have to distinguish between print textbooks and online textbooks, because the ones that are online are updated much more often, much more quickly, right? The time between a new information becoming available and the updates being made to an online textbook are much shorter than having to do a new print version of a print textbook. So this has been studied, and you look at things like, all right, this entry was missing some new information. Does that mean it's wrong? No, it just means it was not fully up to date. And how important was that information? Would that change the bottom line recommendation of the treatment of that topic, et cetera, et cetera? So you have to drill down a little bit deeper. But if we ask sort of the more general question where there's something about the entry that was not complete or unbiased or updated, and you get figures that are kind of all over the place. It's generally like 25, 30, 40, 50%. It's not like just one number. But again, that doesn't mean that it's wrong or that it's worthless, just that there's a delay. There's a delay between when new studies are published in the literature and they find their way into a textbook. The sort of rule of thumb that we use as physicians, that textbooks are about 2 years out of date. Again, we know this. Right? This is no news to anybody. Of course they're 1 to 2 years out of date, although again, the online stuff, that window is closing. Because there's a certain amount of time it takes to do the publication process to get something into written form. But here's the thing. So I just retired as a physician after 30 years. And that's only counting after my residency, right? 30 years. So do you know how many times I've consulted a medical textbook in the last 30 years? Never. I don't think I've ever a single time consulted an actual textbook, except when I was doing historical research about information in textbooks, right? But I don't consult them for information about how to practice medicine because they're outdated. We know that there is a delay. What do we do today? We look it up online. I go to PubMed. I do an internet search. I look at recently updated systematic reviews. When I do a PubMed search and look for systematic reviews to get the latest info, I'm going in reverse chronological order. If something wasn't published within the last few months, certainly within the last year, I may not even get to it. Like, I consider that to be outdated, especially for a review. So we're not relying on textbooks for updated information. That's not what you use textbooks for, right? You don't use them to get the latest up-to-date information. You use them for stuff that's likely not to change very often, like anatomy. Right? Our knowledge about anatomy is not rapidly changing all the time. And so, not that there aren't updates, but that's not likely to change as fast as, say, what's the latest and greatest treatment for this difficult disease. No one's cracking open a textbook to find out, what's the standard of care for this treatment? Why would we do that? We're going online and looking up databases and getting the up to the date information. In fact, there are specific databases like up to date. It's literally called up to date. And why do we use that? Because it has stuff that even before it's filtered into the online peer-reviewed databases, like this is the most recent information. So that's what we do. Now, if you look at the comments to this video, of course, it's full of just complete ignorance and misinformation about the practice of medicine. So I wanted to clear up some of the things there as well. You know, people say, oh yeah, doctors who are out in practice, they could be 10, 20 years out of date. It's like, well, I hope not. I'm not guaranteeing you that there aren't any doctors out there that haven't kept up to date. But let me just tell you a couple of things you may not be aware of. There's something called continuing medical education. In order to keep your license up to date and any board certifications up to date, you need to earn a certain amount of continuing medical education credits every year. And this is all specialty by specialty, but sometimes, like I'm board certified in headache medicine. In order to maintain that board certification every year, I had to read 20 articles that contained the most important updates or reviews, updates to clinical practice, and then I had to demonstrate that I read them and understood the content and passed a test of my knowledge about them. That was every year in order to maintain my certification. That's pretty standard. And of course, if you're a good doctor and you want to do what's right for your patients, you're going to keep up to date anyway, not just because you have to for a certification. Also, we have this thing called medical conferences that we go to, which is partly how we can get our CMEs, but also we sit in seminars and lectures and we talk with our colleagues and we get up to date and we learn about all the latest and greatest thing in our specialty. That's what we do. We're not just cracking textbooks from 20 years ago. So, you know, learn a little bit about a profession before you deign to criticize it or make pronouncements about what's happening. It's a complicated world out there. And just assume at baseline that you know practically nothing about any field of expertise that you are not personally expert in. That's just baseline humility that we should all have. Most of us know almost nothing about most things. And if you think you can just pontificate about other complicated professions just from what you've absorbed from the culture or the internet, you're wrong. You're going to make naive and ridiculously silly statements about what they are doing or what is standard. At least talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about, or do a little bit of research before you come to a conclusion about it. Just watching a video like this or an interview like this, you got a complete misunderstanding about what is the standard of practice within medicine. So, exhibit a little bit of humility. Don't believe the conspiracy nonsense you see online.